I set out for tonight to cover 3 sections in this presentation. The first one's going to kind of give you a quickie on the budget itself, kind of like the bottom line, because that's the suspense associated with it. And then we're going to take some time, because unlike a lot of other people, I don't think about budgets in terms of numbers. I know there are a lot of numbers associated with the budget, but the budget should really be looked at as the expression of our plan for where we're going and what we're going to do. We've spent a whole year looking at our operation, collecting a whole lot of thoughts and views, and we've set out a course that we've already begun to implement. We've made organizational changes. We've tried to encourage us to, as a district, to go on a quest for academic excellence at another level than what we are at today. We're a district that historically earned its reputation because we didn't accept the minimum state standards as our targets. Now, you all know the minimum state standards have now changed, and districts all over the state are chasing after that. We need to be doing that too, but we ought not be targeting just for that. We ought to be targeting for world-class standards. That's what we're striving for. And our primary focus for next year ought to be on student learning, not on managing numbers, but focusing on student learning and doing all we need as an organization to move for our students' sake, our achievement to even higher levels. That's what made this district the district it is. And as the world has changed so much, we have to be chasing that steeper curve of world change in terms of school improvement. So that's what this is all about. We have to have a budget that reflects that speaks to everybody about that. We also have to solidify at the same time all of our finances. We can't look at, and we'll talk about that in that second piece, we can't be looking at simply the budget. We have to be looking at the finances all around. We have to solidify a base so that we can, in fact, put in a thoughtful kind of way that changes into effect over time that are going to lead us to that. I'm appealing to you. Look at the numbers as you may, but don't get lost in the numbers. Remember the message. What is it we're trying to do? With me? So far, so good. That's not bad. We're going to spend time on that financial planning strategies. That's the second one. And finally, you have a brand new looking budget. I'm going to hand it out to you in a couple of minutes. I won't give it to you now because I want you to listen to the presentation. You ever have somebody hand it out and then they talk about it? No, no, no. It's a very different budget than you used to see. This budget was built from scratch. This was not a budget that was taking our codes and rolling them forward. It was built from scratch. And I'm going to tell you, many people had a hand in doing this. Many people. It actually started last summer. And I invited a friend who was an intern going through a graduate program, still working on it. He was looking for intern work. Whew, perfect. He worked all summer. And he laid out a lot of the historical data and the ways that we need to look at it so that we can analyze that kind of business. And along the way, many, many, many others participated in one way or another. These students right here participated also. They shared with me thoughts and views around what was working, what wasn't working. others shared with me in many settings. I've often spent a lot of time pulling it all together and trying to create a budget that's reflective of where we want to go and reflective of some of the needs that we have. We'll at the end, go over the format because it's a very different format than you've ever seen before. It's a lot more narrative. It's not just about numbers. Again, it's about a story, about what it is we're going to do and how we're going to move forward. Having said that, get rid of the suspense right away. The budget we're proposing is a $78 million budget, just over $78 million, when we compare it to the budget adopted by the community last year of $77.3. It represents a little over $750,000 increase. That's 1%. It was really built to maintain our current programs and services, but don't be confused. This is not a status quo budget by any measure. It keeps our focus on student learning by addressing and funding 7 key areas. I'm going to quickly go through those 7 key areas. However, I want you to know this. It also holds the line on property taxes, calling for no increase in the property tax levy. We're going to invest our money in our programs and services, but we're going to thank our community for all the support that they've given us in the past. No need to ask them for more support now. Let me go through. Adequate funds for our classrooms. I've heard stories that perhaps in some of our, for one example, our science classrooms, where a poor science teacher who really does a wonderful job has really got to scrounge a bit, and sometimes doesn't even have enough of the supplies necessary to do that. I even hear comments about the old equipment. Well, if you're going to build a budget from scratch, where should you start? In the classroom. We ought to have enough classroom materials, supplies, and appropriate equipment to deliver the kind of instruction that our students deserve. Built into this budget is an increase of more than 10% in consumable. Second has to do with class sizes. We have to carefully manage our class sizes at all levels to the extent that we can. First off, you know, certainly with that policy adopted, and I know what I'm pushing to make sure it gets adopted, we're going to implement those flex zones. The budget contains funds to make sure that the class sizes in the kindergarten level will begin that flex zone implementation at the right levels. When we make that judgment about where it has to be, we have to wait a little bit longer. We've learned, and you saw in some of the materials we sent out, it may be as long as August before we have enough solidity of numbers to be able to say, this is where that section's going to be, and this is how we're going to make those moves. At the same time, trying to monitor some of the other grade levels, particularly where it is an example about 2nd grade going to 3rd grade. So we put it in the budget, another position, elementary position, in the event that we actually need to, in addressing that, make another section someplace. And some of that ties back to, you'll recall, when we were talking about the flex zones, some of the people who are already in schools other than their home school, and how we have to try to come up with ways of addressing those problems with those people. That's part of that solution. We have to monitor and adjust high school sections through the scheduling process. We don't want to find ourselves in a position, and we're not going to find ourselves in a position where we're not able to offer a section that we have enough students that really want to be in that section. The fact of the matter is, John, he's right there. John can tell you, as Mark can also, We've already had one huge lengthy session pouring over all of the requests from students, matching them up course by course, paying attention to class sizes, especially some of the class sizes that we saw this past year in math, and have done a pretty effective job. We're feeling like we're really on the target of where we need to be at the high school level in terms of offerings and in terms of class sizes. We made, I think, pretty good progress on that. In addition to all of that, I did put dollars into the budget for positions in case we have unanticipated enrollment increases. You never know what's going to happen. We don't want to be in a position where we don't have funds in the budget if we have to make last-minute adjustments, a section here or a section there to cover what needs to be covered, and especially in special education. That's one of those areas where all it takes is a few students, and next thing you know, you have to add. So we didn't want to shortchange us in the most important things. The teachers we have to work with too. We also want to invest in our own curriculum aligned with world-class learning standards. Again, not Common Core learning standards, that's a foundation. We're looking beyond that. And the plan is a 3-year plan that would identify up to 97 teachers this coming year. That's almost 1/3 of our faculty to engage in this process in small group sessions. We take some time this summer to take them through some intense training about curriculum writing and about world-class standards, and then put them through three-day releases throughout the year so that they can work in small groups to do the work that needs to be done. That process will have to repeat it for the next 2 years. We're putting aside the dollars to make that happen. We have to invest in our own teachers. Now, we want to not only provide them with that opportunity, we also want to support attendance at key conferences and workshops. That's been a problem this year. Heard that in some of our sessions, didn't we? So I hear it from a variety of points of view that we have to have our teachers connecting with the outside world. We need to have them talking with others in their same areas, in statewide conferences, statewide meetings. We just can't keep everybody locked in. And we can't do what we've had to do this past year to say, well, you could go, but you're going to have to find coverage for your class. And by the way, you're going to have to pay. That's not the way we want it. I mean, goodness gracious, we want classes that are well equipped. We want the class sizes to be where they need to be. And we want our faculty to know that we really have great faith in them. And we want to invest to have them reach for where we want them to go. You know, we've already done some things to improve instructional support for all schools. Consolidated the leadership for instruction. We've redefined the roles, and we're still in the process of doing that with the directors and the principals shifting, making those shifts around. We're going to support and expand in this budget the department teacher leader pilot. You know, we're doing that 3-department kind of thing. That's the early stages of that. Says it's going okay. It's going okay. We may have to do a little adjusting, but we need to expand that so that we can be really effective in terms of our leadership and free our instructional coordinators, our directors, up to establish and support the Instructional Program Advisory Council, that broad group that's going to help us look at what the graduate of Niskayuna should look like in the future, and then establish that district curriculum and assessment council to kind of set our priorities, do planning. One of the underlying thoughts behind all of this is we need to do planning. I pointed out early on when I came to the district, I didn't see a lot of evidence of long-range planning. In this particular business, you have to be thinking way ahead. You have to be. And you have to provide time. You shouldn't do knee-jerk reactions to things. You've got to be planning it. And we need the mechanisms and the approaches for doing that. Strengthening leadership for student services and support. We have, as we pointed out, Maria was here to talk about the new requirements for English language learners. We're going to put our foot into the water, at least at the secondary level, by adding to our English learner staff so that we can begin to implement all those new requirements. We're also looking to add, and built into the budget, one more social work. You may recall I came to you last year, and you were kind enough to allow me to do that, and that helped us out at the elementary level. I'm now back saying, geez, I got to do something at the secondary level. We have one person that's covering all 3 of the secondary schools. That's a challenge. That's a challenge. So we would add one more person, and then we'll reassign so that we've got the equivalent of a full-time person at the high school, and then a full-time person covering the 2 middle schools. We're also including funds in here to establish part-time deans of students at the middle schools. More and more, I've spent time with our middle school folks around a variety of student-related kinds of issues. We need help with that. We've got some changes coming our way in terms of needs and population, and we need to respond to that. We want to make sure that we attend to those things, and at the same time, keep the focus for our principals on student learning, the instructional side of the house. That also leads to the next one. It's amazing the number of times we've run across, at every level, a situation with a student that's out of bounds, so to speak. Things that we haven't run across before, that our people aren't accustomed to dealing with. And many times we turn, unfortunately, to the wrong avenue, and that is to look for, well, is this somebody who's going to be in special ed? Well, there are times when it's not. That's dealing with the symptom, not dealing with the problem. We need the help of some student behaviorists. I don't think we have enough demand that we need to add a person, but we need some contractual arrangement so that we have access to it. We occasionally run across that and have had some modest success with some of those things. If we could change behavior, that sometimes allows the youngster to function properly in the regular setting. So we're looking to put aside some dollars to do that. We also had another change from the state in the last one. That is a few years back, in response to the tightening up of funds, the state allowed for schools to reduce down by 1 contest in athletics. Next year, they're saying, oh, their read of the state is finances are better, so they're essentially saying put back 1 more varsity contest for each of the varsity teams. And that last one, to restore fall cheerleaders, that really grows out of, I think, a confusion over something that happened last year. There were some people who thought it was restored at the same time something else was, but somehow or another that didn't happen. That's me just trying to fix up a misunderstanding from last year. There's also some key central service items. Central service, as an example, operation and maintenance. We need to, and I think everybody remembers that we had a problem when we actually had to take down the thing we did at the time we did it, the playground over at Birchwood. But we need to put another one back in. We've been working actively with the folks over there in PTO to get ready for installing a new playground over there. Of course, we didn't have funds set aside for that before, but we did make sure we put that in this budget. We also, as I visit our facilities, there are a number of places where there are some unfinished work that were related to the capital project. Sometimes that shows up in bathrooms, a couple, and sometimes it shows up in classrooms over at Craig or other places. So I think we're really required to get back and start taking care of those things. Capital funds are gone, that's finished, kaput, whatever, but we need to do that. In technology, We know that the Smart Schools Bond Act passed. We know that in the early plans, the governor had identified over $1 million that we would have available. He has not yet, the state has not yet issued any regulations or any guidance on that. But we ought not sit around and wait. We're actually actively working with Caprice and Bosse's and outside consultants to say, what should we do to our infrastructure? How should we most appropriately use those dollars to make sure all of our schools have the type of infrastructure that would accommodate wherever we need to go with technology? Not go out and buy a whole lot of devices that 3 years from now will be outdated, but we want to have something lasting and something that's broader from that. So we've got that going. And you know, in this one, I wish I could make this one go faster to accelerate. The accelerated, I've never had as many calls about late buses in all my years in the business as I've had this year. And I won't go any further, but we'll be starting in early April. I've already talked with the bus drivers. We'll start the process of bringing them back and start the process of hiring some of the other folks that are from first student, that we're going to need those people. And we're going to have to recruit more, because a large part of the problem with the late buses relates to not enough drivers. You have to have enough, and you have to have adequate substitutes to be able to keep the buses running on a timely basis. That's been terrible, terrible this year. We're also going to, however, continue to work with other school districts on shared services. We did very well this past year with the other two school districts, Burke Hills and the Scotia-Glenville school districts, where we shared funds that generated savings for every one of us. That shows up in our bottom line. We're going to continue. Finally, I'll list here, we have to protect and preserve our facilities and our fixed assets. We need to, more than simply comply with the requirement to do a building condition survey, we need a very sincere and thorough building condition survey. As I visit the schools, you can see there are areas that need attention. So that could be the springboard for us to look at taking care of other issues associated with our facilities. Our roof in this building is a good example of that. There are others, and we need to position ourselves to be able to know clearly what our needs are, set clear priorities, and then come at some plan for how are we going to find that thing. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move further into this. With replacing equipment. We shouldn't wait as long as we're waiting to replace some of the science equipment, as an example. But I tell you what, if you really ever want to get a sense of our assets, look at the inventory that we keep. Fixed asset inventory. It's extensive. The number of pianos and instruments that we have, they don't last forever. And you need some sort of systematic plan for how you're going to keep those assets up. You have to have replacement. We've come through a really rough period of time where we didn't have a lot of dollars to put into that equipment. That just put us a little further behind. We're going to have to get better at that. Emphasis, thoughtful plan. Know what our needs are, develop plans, and then fund those plans in a sensible way. Whether we're talking fixed assets, or we're talking instructional programs, plan ahead. Let me switch gears here. And I hope I don't offend anybody in about what I'm about to do. It's one thing to think about the budget. You'll have plenty of time to look over that budget, talk through it, look at that. But I need to draw a context. We have to be thinking about a financial plan, a broader financial plan into which the budget just fits as one of those pieces. Important, no doubt about it, but it's not all. We actually focus almost all of our attention on that top one, the general fund. Why? Well, that's the one we have to take out to the voters. That's the one we have to give to them and say, here it is, and here's the price tag associated with it, here's the impact on your taxes, and we'd like your support. And fortunately, this is a community that traditionally has been really great at supporting its schools. We want to show them that what we're proposing as a budget in the context that is the overall plan is a very good plan and worthy of their support. Let's go through. Each of those other funds have special purposes and requirements. Special aid fund. Any unique grants from the state, not to general state aid, have to be accounted for in the special aid fund. One of the things that we hear about, and it's one of Pat's favorites, we run this required extended year program for special ed students. We're required to account for it in that fund. However, there's a cost sharing between the local district and the state that, generally speaking, is we pay 20%, they pay 80%. It gets a little hairy at times because the dollars don't flow evenly, timing-wise, and it makes funny-looking entries on our accounting records, and people who study those things point that out. Okay? But that's one, and I'll jump over and talk school lunch money. We have to also account for that separately. Okay? And you saw in that report that bracket means we're going down. We have some fund balance left in there, not enough to cover all of that, and the relief is not completely in sight yet. That's not unique to our district only. Every school district in the area is struggling with the same thing. I heard one of the districts is actually going to go back to the federal program, thinking that somehow those subsidies could kind of bail them back out, because we can't run a program if we don't fund it. But the bottom line comes back to us. If it goes negative in there, we've got a responsibility to take care of it. Capital fund, that really, we've been pretty much out of that business, and in most cases it's a kind of no balance in it. It does now have a balance in it associated with the floor back here, because it was a capital project. Remember, we went to the state, we got approval and everything else, so we now have to account for that over in this particular fund. But that's all that's there. Over time, that could be used for what people refer to as R&R, repairs and renovation bond issues, which is what the way periodically districts do to kind of freshen up their schools, because you can't fit it all into an annual budget, so we do it that way. So perhaps that's where we turn for that. The last one is a debt service fund. Now, when it first came to the district, we didn't have a debt service fund. And encouraged that the debt service fund be set up. And I'm going to show you why we did that. Whoa, tough to read. But what that does is it shows you all of our outstanding debt. You can see for facilities we had 4 different bond issues. You see that? 2008, 2009, 2010, 2012. And then we purchased the garage. So that's the debt service for the garage. And then buses. At different times we've purchased buses, and we generally issue 5-year bonds to pay those back. So what you're seeing there is a combination of principal and interest that have to be paid to bondholders. And when you look way at the bottom, we have $90 million of outstanding debt for our facilities. No surprise, that was a big project we did a few years back. And if you, if I can get this to work right. You see this? That's, if we just put into our budget the amount of money we needed to pay this coming year's debt service, we'd have had to put $10 million, almost $600,000. Follow me? And over time it drops, no surprise, but eventually you'll issue other bonds and that'll come back up. I haven't seen the district completely get to the bottom of that thing. So. But we put some funds into a debt service fund on the next page. We've had an initial deposit when we came to you and said we ought to create it. We did some year-end adjustments, and then we began the year 2014 with a balance of $747,000. Now this is how this thing works. Oh, backward. I'm over here. We begin the year. We take in a transfer from the general fund each year, and then we pay out the debt, get a little interest, darn little, at that rate. Nowadays that's the case. And then we end the year and it starts all over again. This coming year, look at the amount of money we put into the budget for transfer to here. Do you remember what the figure was in terms of total payment? There it is. You see how we help ourselves with next year's budget by creating? You follow me? Does anybody follow me? Yes? That the nice thing about this is, put in here, we're allowed to control the amount we put into the fund. We're not allowed to control the amount we take out of the fund. It's a locked box. You can't take dollars out to pay for anything else, so you're providing maximum protection. But you provide yourself with a degree of flexibility in your budgeting. And when you think about budgeting in the future, if you've got debt service that are going down, that allows other expenses that are normally going up to be a little bit offset. So the picture should be, oh, this is pretty good for us. It's already benefited us. And we knew this, incidentally, last spring when we were, last year when we were talking to you about doing this, we knew that we were facing the big bump up, and knowing that we're going to have to put together a budget, we thought, is there a way we could help ourselves? And that will help from there on out. Hopefully that's not, did it make any sense to anybody? Mostly okay? Sound okay? Okay, thanks. Now back to my Finance 101. Because what I'm trying to do is kind of work us down to the concept of fund equity. A balance sheet is just a picture in time of the finances, where you just add up all your assets, identify and subtract all your liabilities, and the result is the fund equity. Fund equity is what people frequently talk to you about fund balance. But I want to talk to you about fund balance because I don't think everybody understands completely the pieces that are in that fund balance and the rules and requirements that govern fund balance. First and foremost, there are two major slices to fund balance. There are what I call reserved fund balance. The state and the auditors say there are two pieces to that. One they call non-spendable, and the other they call restricted. Non-spendable is purchase orders that are processed late in the school year for which not all the goods have been received and the invoices aren't in and we're not ready to pay for it, but we have to set aside funds to pay for it, even though we're going to pay for it in the next fiscal year. You don't want to charge the budget you just made for those purchases. You really set those dollars aside in that fiscal year, so you want to save the dollars that you have going forward, and you do it through this non-spendable entry. Restricted really turn out to be a series of reserves that can be established by the local district within a set of constraints that are placed on. and I'm going to go over some of them. But they're all controlled. They're controlled by the law, the rules, and some, you even need the of the controller to do certain things with certain one of those reserves. Very high kind of thing. They're good to have. We'll talk about them. The rest is the unreserved fund balance. And the unreserved fund balance has limits to it. The most important limit is right here. Whoops. is right there. It's limited to 4% of the general fund budget for the ensuing year. And example, if we came in with a $78.2 million budget, we would be limited to $3,128,000. The rest has to be applied to the next year's budget. You notice I said has to be applied because you can't keep more than 4%. So you got to be careful of how you manage this fund balance to stay within the rules. And equally importantly, to make sure you have sustainability over time. You don't want to build large amounts and then spend them down and make them back up. Not a good idea. Not a good idea at all. I want to give you a sense of the reserves that we have set up. There are listed before it. Tax tertiary, hopefully everybody knows what that is. Somebody says, wait a minute, you've assessed my property at some ridiculous level. I'm challenging that. They go through the local process with the town assessor, and eventually that doesn't get resolved to their satisfaction, so they file in court claims that get adjudicated at some point in time. We have set aside in the past a little over $1.1 million. A footnote says we have already had one resolved issue. The court has directed us to pay back, to change for the assessor to pay, for the assessor to change the assessments and for us to pay back the amount that the taxpayer paid originally. Okay? We have accrued employee benefits, accrued liability. That really relates mostly to things like sick leave that employees earn credit to or entitled to payouts when they leave at retirement or what have you. We set aside dollars for that because we're always clocking that accumulated sick leave that's there. Retirement contribution, the only one that allows that is the DRS as opposed to the TRS, and some small amount has been set for that. Insurance, that's mostly to keep our premiums down, we go with large deductibles, so we have to have some place that when we have the claim that we can pay for our part in the deductible. Workers' comp and employment benefits, we're self-insured for that. We can't, unlike private employers, we can't join the state and pay premiums to the state and let them pay all the claims. We have to pay the claims directly. Even though they process them, the unemployment people, as an example, once they pay unemployment to any one of our people, they come back and say, here's how much we paid out, you owe us that. So we have to.
And that works the same way with workers' compensation.
These are wise things to do. It provides protection, financial stability, and sustainability. You're always protecting against risk because you can't be sure. But you don't do it by making sure it's clear what you're doing and how much you're setting aside. To be as transparent as possible and comply with all of the requirements. Example, an employee benefit accrued liability. Let's say we said, oh, we need $100,000 more. Let's go in and take it out. No, you can't just take it out. You have to make application to the controller's office. The controller's office comes out and does a formal review and either says yes, no, or not quite that much, etc. Where's fund balance come from? And how does this all kind of play together? These are the expenditure categories. I'm looking at the general fund now, not the others. We have General support, instruction, pupil services, that's the set of accounts that the state requires us to keep records of and send to the state. It normally has been used in this district, a lot of other districts, as the format that you're also presenting to the community. You'll see that we're not going to do that in this budget. Will we report to the state what they want? Yes, of course. But to report to the community, we want to report much more detailed information, much more revealed. Okay? Look over here on the revenue side. What shows up? Best way to think about the appropriated fund balance. Remember that last one that was on the bottom there that said you got to put that to the taxpayer? There it is, going to the taxpayer. You use that to balance your budget. Sources of revenue, operating surpluses. I say this to you. Most districts end each year with a surplus. That is the sum of all the revenues less the expenditures. Up another $450,000. And then finally, we have to transfer some money into the school lunch fund to keep them solvent. It's a reality. So you got to cover it. If you put all of that together, you take that beginning balance, the pluses, the set-asides, the remaining $4.6 million, $4.7 million is what would be available. And to give you a sense, it's like one, I'll skip over that. What I'm suggesting, or what I want you to think about conceptually, because it's not just for this year. The technique ought to be right here. We take this amount and even strive for that amount and divide it into 3 years. So we're already putting aside the same amount of fund balance to apply to future budgets for each of the next 3 years. Stability, predictability. And you can see what happens if we do that. We're going to use this amount, you'll see it in our revenue sheet in a moment. We're going to use this amount to help balance our budget. And we're going to have remaining unassigned $3.1 million. And 4% is our limit. See the limit here? It's magic the way it works out like that, isn't it? They could have done this in 5 minutes. It took me 25 minutes to get through. Are you with me? You see what we're doing? We're trying to create the right kind of financial plan to stand on and kind of thrust us into the future. And providing protections. Because we have to do that. That's part of our fiduciary responsibility to provide the right protections against those losses. Okay. How about this one? State aid. Try this. Let me take it to the top. The way in which I tried to come at an estimate is I went back and dug out the state enacted aid figures for 2013-14 and for last year. And you can see the amount they put into foundation. These were increases. The amount they put into the gap elimination aid and the total amount that was available. Okay, take those and we measured the enacted increases. For last year was $852 million. You see how those two pieces are coming together? I then went and looked at the same thing for our school district. I then computed that percentage really is what was our total share of the state's total increase. Get the concept? I then said, well, I know the governor put $1.1 billion into his budget. If his was to be the level, at that share ratio, we should be able to expect a little over $800,000. But what about if it were the Senate? The Senate proposed 1.9. At that sharing ratio, you got the concept, so I don't have to go all the way up. And these are all you have to do is pick up the newspaper and you can read those figures. Didn't get inside any of the other details, but we never did. So. And you can see that means the range of potentials, if that sharing ratio holds, run from the 846,000 all the way up to almost 1.5. I average the three, comes to 1.2. You want to guess what I put into the budget?
1.1.
What do you think I put in?
846,000.
No, I put 1 million. And here's my concept. Both the Senate and Assembly have been strong in their statements that we're going to add to his budget. I didn't get greedy, didn't get foolish either. And $1 million is what I put in. And there is the projected revenues for next year. And there is the $1 million projected increase. And down below, there's the 1.5. Now, I want you to notice that the 1.5 we're putting in here turns out to be the effective level of fund balance that was used this year was projected. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we're in the right ballpark.
Yeah.
But if we keep ourselves within that general level, think about 3 slices, 2/3 put aside, 1/3 used. As time goes by, because the budget will go up, that will actually get to grow just a little bit. And with that concept of trying to stay within 2% variances, keeping our estimate there, we should be able to have a source of that just as part of the ongoing operations without getting carried away about overestimating or underestimating that kind of business, and bring stability to the finances, which is what we're trying to do. Now we're going to switch. Would you, budget books, hand out the budget books. I want to explain something to the audience here. We're going to give the board a binder that has all the pages that make up the budget, all the descriptions and what have you. To duplicate this, it's roughly a 70-page document. To duplicate that and have it available for lots of people to go over, I'm a little worried about spending money to do that, knowing that it's not a final budget yet. So, but eventually, once we have a final budget, we're going to make bound ones like this, and we're going to put them in every one of our main offices in every one of our schools. We're going to put copies in our libraries. We're going to put copies in the town library. We'll eventually get it converted into a PDF so we can put it up on the website. But to try to make a PDF at this stage in the game is like, that's a lot of, do you really want? So, in the meantime, I will have 10 copies of this available in the office for anybody who would like to come up, and we'll find a comfortable spot for you to come up and kind of look through it. I apologize. As a matter of fact, I'd be happy to take, do you have those 10 copies? I'd be happy if people would do a little bit of sharing, just so you get a feel for it. I'm only going to go through a format and the changes and what have you, so people understand it. It won't be until next meeting where we actually sit down and start flipping through the book and say, all right, we pay the tuition. There are others that are going to private or parochial schools for which we have responsibility for health and welfare services, for textbooks, and for transportation. So, and we tried in some ways to split that out so you get a better sense of that. So that the cost we're looking at in the programs that we're offering, there really are programs in our kids. At other sections of the budget, it'll turn out to be cost for others.
When you say private schools and organizations, you list those 27 programs. Those are transportation. We don't, for instance, we don't pay to put a student in an academy full names.
No, but if a student goes to that school and receives special ed services or health and welfare kind of services, they're going to send a bill to us for that, just like we send a bill to, for example, folks who live in Schenectady who attend one of the schools in our district. Because we're putting a nurse there, we're putting a psychologist, sometimes a psychologist there, we're putting a special ed teacher there, and we have a right to bill someone with that. How did they do? Did they overkill you?
No.
Unbelievable.
But it was really important, and I know it took a long time to do it, but I thought it was important to give you that broader context. So it's not, we're not just looking at a budget. We're looking at, this is the way we need to handle our finances. We're building a solid base. We're building some expectations going forward. We're protecting ourselves in the district against some of the uncertainties that are out there to the extent that we can. More and more importantly, it is not a status quo budget. We're on the move. We know where we want to go, and we know how to get there. We need time to allow what's in the system to percolate and produce what we're looking for. I'm really encouraged by where we are with the finances and where we are as a school district and staff. I think we're ready to fly out.
So can you tell us what you would like to see moving forward the next time we meet, and how?
What I expect to do the next time, when we're done together, is to start at the beginning of the book and just take our way through it. If you could take the time to read some of that stuff in advance and go over it. Now, we took it through a whole bunch of workshops during the year, study sessions during the year, and if you notice, much of it parallels what we're doing here. So we gave you some good background on that at the beginning. And we'll do the best we can to walk ourselves through that so we can highlight the changes. I know for those of you who really love for those of you who really love to play with the numbers, I'm asking you to stay with the ideas. Stay with the ideas.
Talk about.
No, I was just commenting that I don't want to, I prefer not to get bogged down in numbers, not that we're not reluctant to describe numbers and how we did whatever we did.
Yeah.
That's not it at all. But they're big pictures issues here. They really are. And from a leadership point of view, that's what's really important. And that's what I think we need to convey to our community too. That we're on the move. We're doing good things. We're planning to do even more good things.
John, I just have one question.
You can have as many questions as you like.
So when you are looking at this from a programmatic roll-up, are you able to use finance manager to able to create reports so that you are running comparisons, or how's that working for you? In other words, taking a chart of accounts and
We've created some new accounts to do this, but really it's, the next step is for me to recode a lot of them so next year we can run it. So
Okay.
it's not totally aligned at this point.
Okay.
I have the budget loaded in Finance Manager and it mirrors this, but it's
Yep.
not quite broken down the same way. So the next project is to make up some new codes so then we can next year run them side by side. So.
Okay.
And she
It's
knows
still a work in
she has my pledge that I'll help her no matter where I am and what I'm doing. Did I not say that?
Now, are there any like state averages or state percentages that are out there that are easily accessible to say, our school district spends X amount on PE activities, X amount on music activities, X amount?
The answer to your question is no,
Okay.
because most people don't do their budgets this way. They-
I hear that say, oh, well, how do we know that we're spending more than
they-
another community on this and where I'm at? I just didn't know for the community if there was a way to say, oh, yeah, look, this kid spends X% on this compared to.
The only way you can do that is back here. You see on that side?
Yeah, that was the only category.
You can do that, but let me give you one example. You see on the programs for students with disability, that all the costs, whether they're
Our programs are the programs that we're sending youngsters to, that we pay tuition for, are included in there. And you'll hear when we get to it. We pay as high as, if I remember the figure right, $85,000 for some individual students. Not many of those, but high price, high needs students. So when you have that in there, and you now want to compare with another district, you don't have, that's not